So I'd like to welcome the speakers and the participants to this really exciting session. Loss and damage is such a critical issue for many of our members and partners. And this session is giving from an African perspective. And of course, our African countries, they are in many ways affected more than many of the countries in the world. And at the same time, they really want to understand what will come from the Loss and Damage Fund. So in COP27, it was concluded a breakthrough agreement, a very significant agreement on loss and damage, and to set up a fund for low-emitting countries hit hardest by the climate emergency. But will Africa's most vulnerable communities benefit? As we all know, African natures are buffeted by various combinations of effects of climate change. I visited many countries over the last 2 years that I've been in this role. And of course, it's really extreme impacts that we're seeing now, almost on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, the severest floods, the severest droughts, the severest weather conditions overall. So we want to know what will happen with this fund. Now, loss and damage finance is a foundation for a greener and more prosperous future. Climate vulnerable countries can't invest time and money in green energy farming and transport systems if they can't meet basic needs or rebuild after climate disasters. It's almost like now we don't have that level playing field or that basic level. When you get knocked by a climate disaster, it takes you below and you have to bounce back even better, or you're in a more vulnerable situation than before. With such a fund, we can enable our countries to be resilient, but the fund and the finance has to flow. So in this regard, it's swift action that can speed up the process of bounce back. By learning lessons from similar efforts outside the Climate Change Convention for funding loss and damage, this is what we need, learning how it can work and how it can work effectively for countries and communities within countries. This session brings together key GGGI partners, the Africa Risk Capacity World Food Programme, Africa Group of Negotiators for Expert Support, and the Least Countries Developed Group of the UNFCCC and the International Organization for Migration, IOM. I'm looking forward to hearing what everybody has to say. We're looking at how we can push forward this agenda even more and play a really significant contribution to establishing a fund that really works for the people in Africa. Thank you. Over to you. Nagnuma, thank you.
Thank you very much, Helena, for that and for setting the scene in regards to what is the expectation of this session, which you've actually rightfully stated. In order for resilience to be built, the funds needs to flow. So this session is going to see how can we make those funds flow and what have been the processes that have been undertaken by the various experts as well as the various partners that will be showcasing some of the experiences and activities on the ground. So this year's session is really Africa focused because we want to delve deeper into what are the issues on the ground. So in order to do that, we have our panelist, George Onkoya from Agnes, and George is he's the team lead at Africa Group of Negotiation and Experts currently based in Kenya. After that, we have Mr. Zumana Jara, who is the head of Contingency Planning Division at the Africa Risk Capacity, followed by Ms. Hind Benani, who is based in Dakar. And she is a specialist on migration, environment, and climate change at the International Organization for Migration. We also have Mr. Haile, we also have Mr. Haile, the WFP Director for Southern Africa. And finally, we are concluding with Ms. Madeleine Sarr, who is the head of the Climate Change Division at the Ministry of Environment and Sustainable Development in Dakar, of Senegal, based in Dakar, as well as the current LDC chair. So as we move on to the next slide, I would like to give the opening to Mr. George from Agnes to give us a history of financing mechanism, especially in relation to loss and damage. Over to you, Mr. George.
Yeah, thanks, moderator. and greetings from Nairobi. Now, the issue of climate change, as you are all aware, Africa is, IPCC has shown that is the most vulnerable continent. And those of you who have been in this space for a long time, you realize that when the convention was being negotiated at that time, loss and damage was not identified and included in the convention, although it was raised by the island states because they were already experiencing the increased cyclones and hurricanes. However, over the years, the issue of loss and damage being residual impacts that cannot be addressed even with adaptation were finally agreed and included in the Paris Agreement in 2015. Now, the effect of that, then it means that how do we now deal with that kind of relationship between adaptation, loss and damage, and of course mitigation on one side. Now, our partners have argued that loss and damage is part of adaptation, but Africa Group has remained very clear that loss and damage should and must remain independent because it deals with specific impacts that cannot be addressed with adaptation. However, when you deal with both adaptation and loss and damage, then you can be on the road towards building resilience. So I think that becomes important. Now, as Helena did indicate, the COP27 was a milestone. For many years, of course, in 2013, we agreed on the Warsaw International Mechanism on loss and damage, and then we have had San Diego, but there was no mechanism for funding losses and damages, and that's why the Sharm el-Sheikh becomes a very important milestone in that the Loss and Damage Fund was established and a technical kind of committee, transition committee was established of 24 members to try and give effect to that decision. Now, one, I think it's important that we agreed on a fund. Number two, it's important that we agreed on a transition committee, and because it's similar to the process we went through when we were establishing the Green Climate Fund, and we're happy that the transition committee has been working. Of course, we are hearing signals that they may not be agreeing on some things, but at least the COP28 has to make that decision on the operationalization of the loss and damage fund. Now, how do we see it emerging from the context of Africa? One is that we would like to see it as an independent fund, independent from the existing funds, the Green Climate Fund or the GEF or Adaptation Fund. Why? Because it is so specific to deal with specific issue onset that we don't want it to be clouded by the other funds. Of course, we do realize that we'll be increasing the number of funds, and yet we have not even been able to access the 100 billion that was promised. Nevertheless, I think it's important that we establish it as a separate fund with a flexible mechanism, and I'm happy to see that one of the panelists is my good friend Haley, whom we've interacted for a long time from WFP, who always come out to support in event of emergencies, and I think that's where we need to hear from experts like them, institutions like them, because they can tell us what will be the best way to organize that kind of fund so that it can respond at the shortest time possible so that people can bounce back. And given that he's based in Southern Africa, he can also talk about the cyclones that hit the Southern Africa region, and how people have been impacted negatively in Mozambique, Zimbabwe, Malawi, and Madagascar, and the rest. And therefore, for us, it's a critical milestone that we operationalize that fund. We believe that in addition to the humanitarian resources that is out there, we should have more resources being channeled into that fund so that they are able to respond to those losses and damages. Now, there are many areas that are important besides the extreme weather events that are happening there. Agriculture for us in Africa is very, very critical, and it happens to be one of those sectors that are heavily exposed to these extreme weather events, and therefore we would like to see the scope of what could be covered to include losses and damages, including those extreme weather events, but to agriculture and a few of those other needs. So thanks, and I look forward to hearing from other colleagues.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, George, for giving us the genesis of how officially we have moved to not having discussed about loss and damage to having a concrete agreement made at Sharm el-Sheikh. Thank you for that. So as we move forward, I'd just like to remind all these panelists and the speakers that we have 8 minutes for each intervention. So now we move to Mr. Diarra from Africa Risk Capacity. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Nanyuma. Good day. Buenos dias. Bonjour, everyone. So many thanks really for having me as part of this discussion on loss and damage funds. So next slide, please. So African Risk Capacity started its journey in 2012, grounded basically in resilience. So saying insurance as effective only when part of a larger resilient landscape. So ARC is a multi-country risk pool entity which focuses on disaster response. And our mandate focuses mainly on resilience at the disaster response phase. So the main is really to ensure the ability of permanently, let's say, cash-strapped African government to respond rapidly and effectively to disaster. So by preventing damage from getting worse in the aftermath of a disaster. And ARC started its operations to provide insurance product to mitigate against the effect of drought in African government in 2014 via its affiliate, which is ARC Limited. So providing funds that help really drought-affected population to weather and to maintain on their lands can dramatically reduce the human and economic cost of a drought, for example. So ARC achieves this by really bringing together 3 critical elements that create a powerful value proposition for the member states which are participating in this mechanism. So mainly early warning system, contingency planning, and risk pooling and transfer facilities. So the vehicle allowed African Risk Capacity to really help its members build capacity to lead their own responses in the aftermath of a disaster. However, this is only possible if the funds are dispatched quickly and if they can be transformed into material supplies that are delivered quickly to the affected population. So per se, ARC cannot really mitigate the actual incidence of drought, but its aims is to mitigate some of the effects, such as insufficient food, prior to the situation becoming really disastrous. So resilience to the effect of drought is built into how the financial product is provided by ARC. So the preparation necessary to avert really the worst effects of oncoming disaster is key to the purpose of the ARC insurance product. Indeed, ARC has two parts. One is dedicated to the development of insurance product that can be financed in the international insurance market, so supporting financial resilience. And the other part supports African governments in understanding what type of disaster impact they face and in developing the operational and contingency planning necessary to deliver assistance. So to date, ARC has offered over 1.2 billion in risk cover in different hazards such as drought and tropical cyclone to around 15 member states. And ARC has also disbursed a payout worth over 165 million, and more than 6 million people were provided with assistance throughout a different delivery mechanism to address their immediate food security need and prevent them having to sell off their asset, the small assets, they might have. Also, training has been provided to a national government, really around more or less 20 countries across the continent. ARC has also broadened its partnership by bringing humanitarian actors into this ex-ante disaster risk financing instrument in order to replicate the insurance policies of countries, hence increasing country level of insurance coverage and the number of population offered protection. Next slide, please. So with no doubt, the ARC mechanism offers multiple opportunities for development partners with different focus areas such as multi-years premium support, for example, product development, and enabling operation. So given that the continent has African expertise in organization like the African Risk Capacity, which is a specialized agency of African Union that is mandated to help member states plan, prepare, and respond to climate disasters. So its knowledge and experience acquired while working with vulnerable African countries can offer, for example, multiple opportunities to channel loss and damage compensation on preparedness as approach, mainly early warning system, strengthening the contingency planning tool and responses. So from demand side, we can see these funds can or will address probably priority areas by improving, for example, insurance uptake in providing a larger protection to African population. Also, of course, contribute to build resilience to natural disaster and strengthening in this way African economy. So the gender component mainstreaming is also a huge commitment which require joint effort from all the partners. So I will say the coordinated effort of partners toward climate change mitigation on the African continent can be channeled through really African Risk Capacity, which can have a notable impact. So with no further ado, thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Zumanadera, for showing us the importance and, of course, recollecting that early warning system, risk pooling, contingency planning. All of those are really critical when we are also discussing loss and damage, and most importantly, the importance of coordination. So I want to thank you very much for that. I will hold all the questions until further where we can have a Q&A session. So for now, we shall move to Ms. Hind Benani from IOM. Hind, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nanya. It's my pleasure to be here. So just to reintroduce myself for the participants, so I'm Hind Benani. I am based in Dakar, Senegal, where I cover West and Central Africa for the International Organization of Migration on the fascinating topic of human mobility in the context of climate change, or migration, environment, and climate change. So maybe just to go back to the loss and damage topic, and I would like to broaden it to the climate discussion topic, because we at IOM as migration folks, we are very happy to see that things are progressing on the human mobility front when it comes to the climate discussion, because that was not that obvious from the beginning. And looking back at COP27, we would like just to stress that the Sharm el-Sheikh implementation plan acknowledges the human rights of migrants and people in vulnerable situations, and notes with grave concern the impacts of climate change on human mobility, including displacement, underlining the importance of an adequate and effective response to loss and damage. We would like also to salute the fact that discussions on migration and displacement were also present outside of the negotiations. COP27 saw an exponential increase in attention dedicated to these issues in public and side events, thanks to civil society, academia, migrants, youth, and children, the UN and government representatives. Over 50 side events focused on climate-induced migration at COP27, and we know that for sure that in COP28 it will be also the case, and also just informing that there will be a climate mobility pavilion, so a pavilion dedicated to climate mobility. So I think this is definitely a growing topic in the climate change discussions, and it's also it can support all the discussions regarding not only loss and damage, but also adaptation and also mitigation. So what are we talking about when we talk about human mobility in the context of climate change? What I told you it was a fascinating topic, because it's about the human realities of climate change. So it gives also human face to the realities of climate change. And I'm covering a region, West and Central Africa, which is extremely vulnerable to climate change, and where migration is also an important adaptation strategy and has always been part of the dynamics, the sustainable development dynamics, but also the resilience dynamics. So what are we concretely talking about? So climate change is already impacting human mobility patterns in the region, because of course, as we all know here, we don't know, it doesn't need to be repeated, but Africa is a huge continent, and there are a lot of different realities that are covered here. So I would like just to focus. I had the choice either to give you a broad overview on Africa, or giving you realities of West and Central Africa, and opted for the second, just to be more specific. So according to the Internal Displacement Monitoring Center, as of the end of 2022, the region accounted for 1,100,000 56,000 internally displaced people due to disaster. So which disasters are we talking about? Like floods, storms, or landslides mainly, which represents a people in West and Central Africa. As Mr. Wamukaya rightly stressed, we are in a region and even a continent where agriculture is extremely important. So from a human mobility perspective, what does it mean? Or migration perspective, what does it mean? So climate change threatens food production, the means of subsistence of the agricultural income of rural households in a region where agriculture represents 30 to 50% of GDP in most countries and massively relies on labor migration. I think it's very important. We often talk about root causes, the climate root causes of migration, of out migration. But when it comes to agriculture, but we forget that also agriculture is one of the main sector, if not the biggest sector, recruiting migrants on the continent. And it's very important also to highlight that, because this reality is often overlooked. So labor, the agricultural production, is made by people. So it's very important to also highlight the social and human dimension of agriculture through labor migration. And another trend I would like to highlight is that by 2050, the region is also expected to be the most impacted by an overwhelming urbanization. We are in the fastest urbanizing region in the world, and at the same time, the World Bank, through its Groundswell reports, foresees that 32 million people could be compelled to move within their countries. We are talking about internal migration due to slow onset events such as land degradation, sea level rise, and so on. So if no climate action and inclusive development is implemented, foresays the World Bank, 32 million people could be compelled to move within their countries, which for a country like Benin would represent 55% of its total population moving within the border. So it's very important. And when we know a little bit the region, the coastal area is extremely urbanized, and it's also, we are talking about territories of opportunities for migrants, but also migrants areas which climate resilience is at stake. So it's very important to have a look at this, we could say, contradictory dynamics. But we cannot discuss human mobility in the context of climate change in the region without considering transhumance, as you all know. And on the continent, the continent hosts 37% of the whole nomadic world nomadic population. And West and Central Africa contributes a lot to transhumance movements. So in recent years, climate change, environmental degradation and disasters, urbanization, land privatization, changes in farming practices, and insecurity have affected transhumance patterns, routes and periods, as well as relations with other communities. In Mali, an IOM study reported that 15% of herders surveyed had to change their initial itinerary, including 8% because they faced difficulty in accessing water or pasture. Respondents also mentioned wildfires and decrease of pastoral areas as some of the main issues affecting their mobility. So without a more sustainable and inclusive government.
Sorry, we're running out of time. Sorry,
I'm sorry.
Would like to wrap up. Thank you.
I'm coming to the key messages. So definitely it's important to keep on strengthening collaboration and partnership, and it's very important. Thank you so much for having me here, because having technical dialogue is important, and also promoting nature-based, right-based, and community-based solutions, and also maybe focusing also not only on at national level, but also on cities of the region to also develop solutions that can include migrants, but also climate perspective. Sorry for having been long. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Hind, for showing that the issues related to loss and damage is not purely about finance, but it also has a significant human implication. And that implication goes beyond just human mobility and transhumance, but also can actually cause and catalyze issues related to conflicts. So the loss and damage, as had mentioned by George from the beginning and also reinforced by Mr. Jara, is that we need rapid flow of resources in order to mitigate and support adaptation. So without further ado, I'm going to ask Mr. Haile from the SADC region of WFP to give us concrete examples of how this is unpacked based on the WFP experience. So over to you, Mr. Haile. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon and good morning, wherever you might be. And my name is Mangastab, and as introduced, I'm the regional director for the World Food Programme in Southern Africa. I'm very honored to join these panelists, and thank you, Madam Moderator, for giving me the opportunity. In this presentation, I would like to focus more on the technical aspects because Helena and George have explained what is the loss and damage and the issues related with those. In Africa, WFP supports national governments to provide food and nutrition assistance to vulnerable communities impacted by various shocks such as conflicts, natural disasters, and extreme climatic events. Furthermore, we also work to support governments to develop capabilities to reduce risks and response capabilities, including early warning systems, and that will help them to reduce the impacts of the negative impacts. Now, here I would like to talk about food insecurity in Africa and the impacts of climate change. It is important to note that most of the food consumed by African populations is produced by smallholder farmers who use traditional agricultural practices and are heavily dependent on rainfall. Such agricultural practice is highly vulnerable to climate variability and climate change. The frequency and intensity of extreme weather events such as droughts, floods, storms have increased, making the food systems that African populations are dependent on becoming highly vulnerable. Now, I say this because the frequent droughts do impact negatively on the whole food system, from production reduction, storage, access to market, distribution, transport, all are disrupted. And here, the poorest and the most vulnerable who contribute the least to climate change are disproportionately impacted, facing the largest damage and losses. To reduce the impacts of extreme weather events on communities, WFP works with communities, government, institutions, and development partners, and implement various activities, including establishing early warning systems. For example, this year, during Cyclone Freddy, that hit Madagascar, Mozambique, and Malawi, thanks to the functioning early warning systems, lives were saved. However, the cyclones destroyed agricultural land, infrastructure, and displaced many communities with extensive damage and loss. These communities, before they have recovered from last year's successive cyclones, Freddy hit them. we don't know what will happen also next year. They might be hit again, and the tendency is that things are getting worse. Now, it is a huge financial challenge for the governments of the respective countries to restore the damaged infrastructure and rebuild the livelihoods of the communities. It takes several years for the communities to recover, and before they do so, they will be hit by the next cyclone. To reduce the impacts of extreme weather events on the vulnerable communities, governments in collaboration with their partners such as WFP, ARC, GGGI, are implementing various activities such as establishing early warning systems, availing insurance products such as that provided by ARC. During the immediate and after emergency, we provide food, water, and shelter, and enhanced protection. Smart agriculture, support communities, climate proofing infrastructure, and many other local interventions. However, governments and local communities know what is needed to reduce the impacts of climate on their communities. The challenge is lack of adequate financing that is timely and reliable. We are pleased to know and to hear that the Loss and Damage Fund is being established. And thanks to George, your team, and the African group for really pushing on this and reaching this level. But we hope this fund will be available and accessible and adequate, because that is where the challenge we have. Now, let me also take this opportunity to say a word about ARC and GGGI. As you know, both institutions were established in 2012, 11 years ago. And both organizations are addressing the challenge of climate change from different angles. And what is the challenge here is the availability of resources. ARC does have all the African Union mechanisms. It is in place, but it does not have the resources that it needs to protect the livelihoods of communities. And we propose that such a fund to support those existing institutions. Now, I will conclude by one line referring to the upcoming El Nino. We know we are expecting El Nino, and we know what it will do in the region. We know it will reduce production. We know that agricultural production, because of droughts and so on, there will be reduction. What are we doing as communities and as partners? My suggestion would have been to increase areas covered under irrigation, because there are countries in that region that can produce more, enhance their irrigation, and therefore we can be prepared for the coming season. So I will stop here, and thank you for giving me this opportunity. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Haile, also for really staying under time, and I really much appreciate that. And I appreciate also the fact that you've created the interlinkages between all the various organizations, starting with the role of Agnes pushing the agenda of loss and damage, and also pushing the voices of the most vulnerable to be heard in order for this fund to be actually even concretized. And then moving to ARC with its contingency plan and early warning systems, and how they're working with governments, and as well as the IOM and WFP, working with local communities in order to build up their adaptive capacity to not only be able to build better resilience, but also to be able to develop mitigation solutions in order to really be able to still live and be resilient under our climate changing world. So thank you very much for that. One thing you have mentioned is that, of which all of you have mentioned, is that loss and damage is not just about funds. When we're talking about Africa, we are looking at the numbers of people that are affected. from the smallholder farmers to families to big impacts on migration. You're looking at the human mobility, the impact on conflict, the impact on infrastructure, as well as issues such as transhumance. I mean, all of this really means that the fund is something that needs to be expedited, at least when it comes to the context of Africa. And of course, Mr. Jawa, you mentioned that there are skills and there is capacity for our countries and African governments to be able to operationalize the fund. So this is the aspect of skills is not an issue in operationalization. So as we move further, we're going to boil down finally to Ms. Madeleine Sarr, who's going to give us another perspective of the LLDC group. So over to you, Ms. Sarr. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Kone, and also thank you for also for GGI for inviting me to be member of this great panel. And good morning, all participants, and also all presenter and speaker from this discussion around loss and damage. Yes, I think regarding the LDC's group perspective, as you present us, we really looking for having great outcome from COP28. Just to let you know that many LDCs country are from Africa. So actually we are around 46 LDCs, and I can say 2/3 of LDCs are from Africa. And we know that LDCs are really the one who emit in this process less. We have less than 1% of the global emission, and we are around 1 billion population. So talking about loss and damage for us is has been said by some speaker before me, is a matter of justice. Someone, one of the speakers say that when you, as a country, every year you are being exposed to extreme event, how you will achieve your development. You always have to put a resource, your local budget, in order to solve the impact due to climate change. So this is really a big issue. So it's why we're talking about justice, why we're talking about solidarities. Africa is less than 4% of emission globally compared to the global world, and we are all affected. So this issue of loss and damage is now critical. And what the IPCC is saying to us has been said by Professor George, the issue will be more and more increasing, so it will become worse. So when are we going to develop? If we always have to recover, if we have to face extreme events. And we saw that every year we can list the numbers of countries in Africa, LDC countries in Africa, around the world, being totally devastated by extreme event. Who is supporting that? We talk about the humanitarian system. We know they are doing something, but it's not sufficient. It's really far from what we require. And how the support is provided. We know that the support is totally been fragmented. How is respond to the need of these communities, or this ecosystem, of these countries? And when you have this repetition of extreme event, what we will do? So we're talking about migration. Yeah, people have to move. But is it the solution? No, it's not the solution. So it's why we're talking about justice. And I think there was a process, a long process, discussing around loss and damage since the Varsovie COP. So we bring this issue of what we call the Varsovie mechanism, we now have the Santiago a network on loss damage, who is not yet operationalized. It's supposed to be a technical process to help countries, particularly vulnerable countries, to develop the institution around loss and damage, but it's not yet operationalized. And we expect from COP28 to have the loss and damage, the Santiago network being fully operationalized. But the fund is required, as I say. Our country are paying the high cost of climate change, and we are not responsible. And we want to develop. It's a matter of equity. It's a matter of justice. So we're calling for these solidarities. How to establish this fund? I think this is something going on. We still discuss on it. We are far from having an agreement, but I think at the global level, we need to be all, conscious. But this is a matter of all of us. It's a matter of global solidarities in order to support those countries who are always facing climate change impact, climate change extreme event. So the issue is this fund is been established in COP27, and I think it was really a great outcome coming from an African COP. But we now need this fund to be really effective. So this requires some resources. And we need to talk to all levels where resources have to come. And we need also to take on board, but there are also this issue of historical responsibilities, but we can't deny. Developed countries have to take their role, their leadership on this process. We need to find also additional resources in order to really fit this fund. So this is the discussion we're gonna have. There is the transitional communities who have proposed a paper. We still need to continue discussing on that. But I think, as I say, it's a matter of solidarities. It's a matter of equity for development. It's a matter for justice for those communities who are not responsible of climate change, who are always facing this impact on their shoulders. And it's a matter of these countries also, as I say, LDCs countries, African countries, who are not emitting a lot, who are not as responsible of the climate change, to see some support being provided to them on that. We as LDCs, we want to see 3 windows on this for this fund. One that allow us to operate immediately when you have an extreme event like the one we do have in Malawi, Madagascar, many African countries, even in Senegal, when we have flooding, to ensure that there is rapid response to help these communities. We also thinking that there is a need also to help this country to recover. As I say, you lost some infrastructure, you have some degraded land. If I take the case of coastal zone in Senegal, we built some dike. We put our own resource through loan to do that. Instead of paying for education, instead of paying for health. And this cannot be a repetition. So there's clearly really need to have some clear support on process that it is really something new, have to be additional because we need adaptation. Loss and damage is coming when you have not appropriate adaptation. It's coming because we are not in a position really to fulfill the recommendation of the science, the IPCC, who say us we need really to achieve the 1.5 degrees Celsius by 2030.
We might have to wrap up so we can get a few time for some FAQs. Thank you.
Thank you for bringing me back to this point. But as I say, at SDC, we're looking for really the fund to be effective. And we have, our position is it have to be a rapid process. It have to be also a grant support, particularly when we're talking about rapid action. We have also to look at the disbursement of this fund. It have to be accessible with simplified process, and it have to be direct access for countries. So these are position we're having regarding the loss and damage, and we're looking really during COP28 to finalize operationalization of this loss and damage fund. Thank you for that.
Thank you very much, Madeleine, for that, for showing that on the road to COP28, Africa Group of Negotiator, Africa LDCs group have a vision, a mission, and an objective. And I think that is quite reassuring. Madeleine, you've made us realize today that it's an issue of quality, equality, it's an issue of solidarity, and it's an issue of cooperation and collaboration between all the partners. And this is really the essence of this conversation we're having today. This conversation is about how do we bring in key thought leaders and key organizations in Africa that have the same mandate to brainstorm on the challenges and the opportunities. So we are really running out of time. So before we close, I had a set of questions. Unfortunately, I am unable to ask all those questions. So I am going to go speaker by speaker and ask them to give us in maybe 2 words. When you think loss and damage, give me, if you can give us 2 words of what you think of when you're looking at the term opportunities, and 2 words when you think of the term challenges. Starting with my colleagues from ARC, when you think loss damage, what 2 words do you have when we talk about opportunities, and what 2 words do you foresee when we talk about challenges?
Thank you very much. Of course, with African Risk Capacity Mechanism, as I said, this is really an opportunity for us to focus really on a very critical area, such as, for example, premium support for our member state, product development, and also contingency planning operations.
Thank you very much. Contingency planning and operations, excellent. So also from our team, from Agnes, George, this time not when you think about the opportunities, but 2 words that come to your mind when we think loss and damage and when you think of challenges.
Yeah, we just have to operationalize a loss and damage fund at COP28.
Excellent. The need for operationalization, the need for contingency plans. Moving to IOM, 2 words that come to your mind when you see loss and damage and when you think about opportunities.
Well, regarding the opportunities, it's about the incredible interest that we witness when it comes to people, including migrants, when it comes to the climate change discussions. So they are incredibly enthusiasm and willingness to give a human face to the climate change discussions. And the challenges might be the silos, maybe again, that sometimes stop us to build integrated and inclusive and sustainable solutions.
Thank you very much. Let's stop working in silos. Excellent. Now moving to my colleague from WFP, 2 words when you think about opportunities.
Thank you. I would say timely action will support the world in terms of biodiversity and also carbon, thinking of the Congo Basin and thinking of all the wildlife that we have in the Southern African region. So timely action will also contribute to the world's well-being. Thank you.
Excellent. Here we're bringing in the aspects of wildlife and ecosystem services. So as we go to our last speaker of the day, Madeleine, 2 words when it comes to challenges.
Challenges is resource mobilization. So this is one of the big challenges we're facing, and access to resource for vulnerable countries. And the opportunities is global solidarities.
Excellent. Global solidarities, resource mobilization. We need to operationalize and we need to develop early warning systems. So with that, I'm going to say thank you very much from my side. This is the end of my moderation. However, before we go away, I would like to hand over to our head and regional director for GGGI Africa, Dr. Male, for the closing remarks. Over to you, Dr. Male.
Thanks, Naima, and thanks also for these excellent moderations. I would like to take the opportunity as we're drawing to the end of these enlightening sessions, loss and damage, and Africa perspective. Extend my heartfelt gratitude to each of you for your participations and valuable insight and unwavering commitment to address these critical issues. Express thanks as well to Helena for the opening, but also our all participants that are still online, and also our esteemed partners that I can name, ARC, Agnes, IAM, WFP, but also the LDC chair. So in the context of our discussion today, allow me to share a few sobering statistics that's underlying the gravity of these challenges in Africa that we're facing due to the climate change. The African continent is experiencing a temporary increase at the rate of higher than the global average. And this had led to more frequent severe droughts, with over 60 million Africans affected by the consequences. Similarly, flooding and extreme weather as well are on the rise, displacing thousands and worsening the issues of loss and damage. This number emphasizes the urgency of our discussion and action. We have gained a deeper understanding of the pressing need to advocate for implementation of the policy that recognize unique vulnerability of our regions and provide a path forward to mitigate, adapt, and compensate for the loss incurred. The evidence is clear. It's all a call for concerted effort and innovative solution. And I like that Madam Madeleine Sarr mentioned earlier, that it's about justice, it's about equity for development, more importantly, global solidarity. I think the contribution of all of you today, the experience that you have shared, and also the perspective have enriched this dialogue, and this will undoubtedly serve as a catalyst for positive change. The passion and dedication demonstrated here today are a powerful reminder that united, we can drive progress and make a lasting impact on the life of those most affected by climate change. As we leave these sessions, let us just carry forward the knowledge and the momentum gained here, continuing championing the policies and initiatives that address loss and damage with the African perspective in mind, but also our collective effort hold the potential to shape more the resilience and sustainable future of our continent. Again, thank you for your unwavering dedications, and I look forward to seeing you and seeing the positive outcomes that will undoubtedly emerge from our collective commitment to this vital cause. Again, thank you for that, and safe journey ahead. And let's keep working again together to make a difference. And I have no doubt through this partnership, collaboration, we can really make a positive change forward. Thanks everyone for joining, and thanks also for this wonderful session.